I'm Peter Gagan, it's my colleague Rachel Hamada, and we're from the Ferret, which is a reader-owned cooperative journalistic cooperative based primarily in Scotland. And what we're going to do today a little bit is talk about how we work, the kind of things that we do, and the focus that we have, and which is primarily on investigative and original kind of broadcast stories. Basically, we started about a year ago. We just recently, this is us on our recent away day, we just celebrated our kind of first birthday, which was quite nice. We started around July of last year. And I guess one of the reasons why we started, for a lot of people, you're kind of, what's the reason? Why did we feel the need to start something new like this? Something that's both reader-owned and journalist-owned, a cooperative that's focused only on investigative journalism. And I guess one of the reasons that we felt that we needed to do something like this was really the absence of kind of quality, properly resourced investigative journalism in Scotland. And I think, internationally, the media, you hear a lot of people at a conference like this talking about the crisis in the media, the problem with funding journalism, especially the problem with funding the kind of investigative journalism that kind of holds power to account and is based on accountability. And I think that problem is even bigger where we are based in Scotland, because we used to have the highest per capita newspaper readership in the entire world. Now the biggest broadsheets don't even sell 30,000 copies. And as pagination has gone down, as budgets have gone down, there's even less room for investigative kind of journalism, the kind of stuff that we do. This is just the front page of our site today. It's a new story that a new exclusive. And one of the reasons, I guess, people watch something like All the President's Men, there's a kind of sense that investigative journalism had a heyday when there was loads of money going into it. That's probably not true. I think it's always been a marginal pursuit. It's always been a difficult thing to get editors and the public really to buy into. But I think we're at a bit of a crisis point now, especially the rise of online journalism, the rise of journalism and clickbait, and also the collapse of advertising revenue that used to sustain traditional investigative journalism and ways of doing investigative journalism generally. So what we decided to do was to look at it from a different point of view, and rather than trying to create content to sell to newspapers or to broadcasters, because almost all of us are experienced journalists, mostly freelance, or people who've worked for various organisations, as I have over the years. And rather than doing that, we thought what we wanted to do is try and find a way to create a new model where, rather than be beholden to advertising revenues and owners, we would actually have our own subscribers owning the project, owning the Ferret itself, and also the journalists who create the content will also be part owners of it. And so one of the great advantages of doing something like that is you don't have a kind of someone at the top, a media mogul at the apex who's in control. You have actually got readers and writers being the ones who control the content and control what's been made. And also, because we don't have shareholders, we don't have the same kind of strictures in terms of producing content that gets massive amounts of hits just because it's sensational or whatever. We're able to focus more, I feel, on quality and on the kind of stories that we think are important for the public. Our principles and how our cooperative run are actually quite straightforward, because sometimes you say the word cooperative and people get a little bit, what does that mean? What is this? How does that work? Is it really complicated? And to be honest, it's not really complicated. What we have is we have journalist members, so I'm one, Rachel is one, and we're part of the editorial team. There's 5 of us on the editorial team. We also have a chair, a secretary, we have a reader member who represents the readers on our board, and we also have a compliance officer who represents concerns around compliance and things like that on our board. So we've got a 7-member board, and we have complete editorial independence in terms of how we make our decisions, and our decisions are reached by consensus. So which can be quite a difficult thing sometimes, but we feel it's really, really helpful, because it allows us to kind of come to stories in a way that everyone involved with the project feels that this story is something that we should be doing. We have a chair, a secretary, we have a treasurer, which incredibly is me, because I can never even get my accounts in any time, but I actually do treasure. I am the treasurer, and it has worked so far. The other thing we do is readers are able to attend regular meetings as well, to kind of feed into what we're doing and to how we work, and to get a sense of what it is we're trying to do. Because as I say, we don't have a pressure in terms of proprietors, our big focus is on public interest journalism. So almost all the stories that we cover, we feel they have to be saying something new and they have to have a genuine public interest. And a lot of the stories that we've covered, I'll talk about them later on. We'll talk in more detail about the stories that we have done. But a lot of them are stories around privacy, around working conditions. We did a lot of work on fracking. Stories that, to be honest, the mainstream media in Scotland hasn't really been able to cover in the kind of depth that I think even a lot of the journalists there would like to have done. So we focus primarily on specific issues that we feel are important, that the people who subscribe to us feel are important. We're also kind of avowedly non-political, so we don't take sides in elections or referendums. We don't run comment pieces. We just stick to factual journalism. We feel that that's the best for someone like us who's got this kind of focus. The best thing is just to stick rigidly to factual journalism and let the readers decide rather than kind of taking a political slant on things. We do other things, like every quarter we produce a transparency report so people can see exactly how much money we have, which can be interesting because before we were wondering whether we'd actually do that, and because we were worried about being sued basically if someone could sue us out of the water and see how little money we really have. But we believed that it was of greater good to let people know how we have the money and how we spend it. And we also believe that good journalism actually costs money. So we do pay for all of the stories. We pay for all the content that goes on the site. We kind of basically agree day rates based on roughly the average industrial wage in the UK, because we feel like that's a fair reflection of the amount of work that goes into something like this. And we often use outside writers as well, freelancers or staff writers, and they get paid the same amount as the journalist directors as well. So we kind of have an equitable spread. And what we find as well is that helps to buy, as well as having the readers, it helps to buy the journalistic community into the idea of the Ferret, because they feel that they have some ownership in it too. And they're often our greatest advocates are other journalists who talk about what we do, who tell other people what we do. And especially in the climate in Scotland where people are very worried about the future of news and the future of media, I guess the Ferret for some is seen as a kind of a bright spot, which has been really positive. The one thing best about the story of the Ferret, I guess, about 4 years ago, I was looking around in the environment in Scotland, and I did feel a lot like we could see the decline of investigative journalism, but also we became interested in ideas around cooperatives, not just for journalism, but for other ways of working. You know, in the wake of the financial crisis, there has been a move where people are looking at cooperatives as a way to tie in value and protect assets. So around 2013, I and some kind of like-minded investigative journalists, many of whom had a good track record in publishing news stories and others who've got great editorial experience, we applied for some funding from the Cooperatives UK. We got awarded a small grant, but that was actually really important. It was only £1,500, but it gave us a huge, it was really important to actually kind of allowing us to germinate, allowing us to do quite basic things like pay for a website, pay for some content, and just to kind of keep the project moving, because at that stage we were very much in the infancy, and it was really important to have even just a tiny amount of money to kind of help us through. But unlike the cable, we didn't launch immediately. We actually spent a few years both talking through what the project was going to involve, but also because of the atmosphere where we were in Scotland, there was an independence referendum, journalism became quite febrile. We felt like we were better off sitting on the outside of it, and so we kind of sat and waited all the way out until the end of the May 2015 general election, by which stage things had kind of calmed down. But now I'm standing to you and Nicola Sturgeon's meeting Theresa May, and I'm going to talk about independence, so things haven't calmed down that much, but it calmed down enough for us to launch. And since then we've grown. What we did, we launched initially with a crowdfunding video, because we decided that rather than trying to fund an entire new outfit, which is always a challenge, it's one of the challenges for startups, how do you create something new? We decided that we'd just try and fund one particular investigation, one particular suite of stories. Rachel will talk more about how we did that later, but that was what we decided to do, and we moved from there. And since then we've actually got hundreds of paying subscribers, which has been really successful. We've had a huge amount of pickup, we've been nominated for awards, and we've had a lot of people have been kind of really got engaged with the project. So from one small investigation we've kind of built into an ongoing thing that now has a continuous life and publishes new stories every week. Rather than expecting our readers to passively consume our stories, we do actually help them. We bring them into the process of news gathering as well. We ask them to help us, to help kind of suggest stories. We also get them to vote on stories. So our very first investigation to fracking arose when we gave our readers 3 separate story ideas and asked them to vote on them. So we've done this quite a few times, where we ask people to vote on what they'd like us to do, and then we go and do it. And again, that helps bring people engaged, and it means that we're covering things that they want to cover. And again, with the cooperative model, you're able to lock in all the value. One of the biggest challenges, I think, and I'll speak to it more later, that we've had at the Ferret, is kind of engaging people around this idea of investigative journalism. If you come to summer school, everyone's really engaged around investigative journalism and think it's great. For lots of other people, it's something that can sound a bit wordy, can be a bit off-putting, can feel a little bit heavy. And when we initially launched in 2013, we called ourselves the Scottish Inquirer. And that was really, to be honest, just because I had to get a name for the funding application to Cooperatives UK. I was like, what are we going to call ourselves? And Scottish Inquirer. And to be honest, it was a little bit wordy and a bit dull. And I felt really, I didn't feel like it worked. So we decided, we'd come up with a new name, we'd find something else. So we had loads of, this is one of the things in the 2 years before we launched, we spent lots of time talking about what are we going to be called. These are some of the various names that we kind of, we looked at and then rejected and then kind of decided we'd just kind of stick with we moved the Ferret and our hashtag nosing up the trousers of power. We do put a lot of pictures of ferrets up on our Twitter feed as well. Be warned if you follow us. We're a journalistic output, we're a journalistic kind of enterprise first and foremost, but we also really do believe in freedom of information and transparency. And in Scotland, we've been quite one of the four kind of most outfits talking about freedom of information laws. There's been quite a few stories to do with freedom of information in Scotland and concerns about access to information and government interference with access to information. And we've been one of the outlets that's been really running a lot of the stories and making the running on it, because we believe that it's something we are advocates for in a big way. And as part of that as well, we always publish all of our source documents. And we recently put up a load of, because we're quite a number of people in the collective who've done a lot of freedom of information requests over the years, we've started uploading our old freedom of information request results just up onto the site, so other people can go and search them and see, they might find stories in them. I think we really believe that this is a really important thing. Because you pick up a newspaper and a freedom of information request reveals, but you don't get to see the freedom of information request. Often the journalists can kind of feel that they want to keep it for themselves, and I think it's really important to publish all the documents. Another thing we do is in terms of engaging readers, we have a community forum in which readers can engage with what we're doing, can comment on stuff, can talk about stuff, can share stuff, and that's been quite a useful resource since we've launched it. And also the nice thing is it allows us to have public access and private access. So there's access for the general public, there's access for people who are subscribers, but then there's also private access just for us. So we can share documents with ourselves on our community forum and talk about it. And then if one of our readers is part of the project, we can invite them to contribute as well and to see what we're seeing. We also use a microsite, our Ferret droppings, for little bits of stories. They're kind of almost like nibs, stories that have a little bit of an interest in them, but aren't enough to flesh out to a full kind of story length. And also it's a good place where you can follow up on things we've done. If something changes, or there's new emergence on a story that we've covered before, we can put it up there. And that's been quite helpful as well. We can just put up all the data. So these are kind of ways in which we try and kind of go beyond just having a static site with new stories. We try and engage people in different ways. I'm now going to hand over to Rachel, who's going to talk a bit more about how we work and the kind of things that we do.
So certainly in Scotland, we've seen more than one new media venture kind of launch in a blaze of glory and content, and then a few weeks or a few months later just disappear and fade from sight. We didn't want to do the same. So we decided to do something new.
In a democracy like ours, investigative journalism is absolutely crucial. It shines a light in dark places that people don't want you to see. And that's really, really important. Without the revelations of Snowden, we wouldn't know about the mass surveillance that the security agencies get up to. And there's dozens of similar examples. If we lose investigative journalism, we lose an essential protection, an essential barrack against the loss of our rights, against the loss of our civil liberties, against the harm to our environment. And these things are all really, really important. And investigative journalism isn't the be-all and end-all in a democracy, but it's a very important part of holding power to account. And without it, a democracy is weaker, and without a good, well-funded investigative journalism, Scotland would be a smaller place. But the old model that funded investigative journalism is breaking apart, it's falling to bits. That was, advertisers used to pay newspapers who used to pay journalists, and that was roughly speaking it. And that's disintegrating. That whole model is disintegrating. So we need new ways in the digital age and the online age of funding investigative journalism. We need new ways to pay journalists to do the work that they do in the public interest, in order that we can, uncover the secrets of the powerful and uncover scandals that otherwise, would remain hidden. The Ferret. The Ferret is a new investigative journalistic platform. We hope the first and best in Scotland. It will be a cooperative. It will be have input from readers. It will not be controlled by any corporation. It will be beholden to nobody really, apart from its readers and writers. And it will well, we've got this phrase, it will nose up the trousers of power, which is a way of kind of saying that we want to be, we're on the side of the powerless against the powerful, whoever the powerful may be, whether they're corporations, whether they're governments, whether indeed they're media organisations, whoever they are. And that's the kind of ethos that got us started.
If you want to see the rest of the crowdfunding video, you can look on Indiegogo for the Ferret and you find it. Our video is probably a little bit too long, but we did do quite well in the end. So if you're looking for examples, if you're doing crowdfunding yourself, you can find it there. But yeah, to start with, we decided to ask for quite a small amount of money. We thought it was better to ask for a small amount and potentially do better than to look greedy at the beginning. So we asked for just over 3,500. We did end up with almost three times that in the end. So the challenge then became how to produce a compelling investigation into fracking that our supporters would feel was value for money. So we put in a huge amount of virtual legwork on this. Crowdfunding's definitely not for the faint-hearted, but we were helped by coverage in publications like The Guardian that helped our reach. We were also helped along our way by support from public figures, from writer Irvine Welsh, for example, folk singer Karen Polwart, some media figures up in Scotland as well. We had a lot of support and that helped us extend our reach too. So in terms of how we work day to day, as a remote collective without any shared space, we work predominantly via email and especially via Slack, which if you don't know is a rather addictive group communication tool that we've renamed Crack. So many FOI requests, interviews, document searches later, we produced a major investigation into fracking and unconventional energy in Scotland. We showed that Scottish Environmental Agency SEPA had warned that underseas coal gasification, which is an unconventional energy method, could risk setting off earthquakes and fire. So it was a report that hadn't been made public knowledge before. We uncovered how a multi-millionaire oil tycoon was pressurising Scottish ministers into doing his bidding. And this is one of the most important pieces. Actually, we revealed which areas of Scotland were likely to be targeted first as fracking sites. We found that peaceful anti-fracking campaigners were being branded potential terrorists or of concern in Scottish anti-terror training materials, in this case Glasgow City Council. We discovered links between funding for SNP, which is the party in government in Scotland, and companies that stood to profit from fracking. We revealed that a leading government advisor has believed that fracking in Scotland was actually no longer viable. We discovered that government consultants on fracking, who were supposed to be neutral, were actually in favour of fracking and had said so publicly. We found out that house prices were predicted to fall in areas earmarked for fracking. And we also, in a more long-form piece, told the story of peoples and communities who were opposed to fracking. So we think that this package offered our supporters pretty good value, as these stories taken as a whole shone a light on where things were at that moment in time with fracking, and let the public know what was going on behind the scenes. So overall, we've published dozens of original investigative stories, must be nearly into the hundreds now, and everything from House of Lords expenses to Facebook censorship, from anti-terrorism training to toxic pools left in areas accessed by the Scottish public by the country's biggest landowner. And our stories have appeared in just about every major Scottish outlet, from the top of BBC News bulletins through to the front page of The Times. We publish standalone stories and also themed packages, often on issues that don't get much attention elsewhere in the media. All editorial decisions, as Peter mentioned, are made by consensus, and we all help each other editing the copy. As someone who's written for national, international outlets, I can say that our editing process is probably just as rigorous, if not more so, than anywhere else I've worked. And it helps that we all care about the stories and also about the Ferret's reputation for accuracy. We're regulated by Impress, the relatively new press regulator, and with our readers we've worked on developing quite stringent complaints and compliance policies. Ethics are very much at the heart of what we do, so that anyone that we criticise in our stories is always offered the right to reply. We always try and ensure some balance. The story that we did on communities opposed to fracking, we also did allow INEOS to include one of their videos kind of defending the practice, but we let our readers draw their own conclusions. We regularly ask our supporters what we should investigate, and based on their suggestions, we've focused in depth over the last year in a number of areas. After fracking, our next investigation looked into issues affecting asylum seekers and refugees in Scotland and also the wider UK. So this was one of our biggest pieces of work. This is in a Scottish newspaper we published online and in association with several other publications. This was a collaborative job between journalists in England, Northern Ireland and Scotland, and we collaborated to produce a really high-impact, long-form piece about the struggle faced by refugee women who faced domestic violence and couldn't get any recognition or any support. So this piece was very much factually rigorous, also fairly emotional, and it's definitely been recognised as one of our most important pieces to date. Another of our stories in this package looked at how there's a culture of disbelief at the UK Home Office regarding torture victims, even when their claims are backed up by medical reports. This story was about Scotland's National Police Force, which was training police in Sri Lanka despite continued evidence of torture. And another piece looked at disturbing footage of refugees trapped in a lorry in a desperate bid to get to safety in Europe. Employment was another major area we looked at, which often doesn't get adequate scrutiny in the media. So Peter did a great set of stories, one particularly on the fact that no UK firm has ever been prosecuted or has been prosecuted in recent years for failing to pay minimum wage. He also uncovered several university stories. Universities are a huge employer in Scotland. So one concerned unis using zero-hour contracts and another using a pretty horrendous botched Big Brother style system to monitor the movements of their cleaners. Meanwhile, I wrote a story about close links and private meetings between the SNP and private welfare to work companies. This will soon be bidding for major contracts in Scotland that will particularly affect people with disabilities. This story actually was a classic example of the fact that quite often people we write about or criticise end up subscribing to us. Part of it might be because they want to get past our paywall and see what we've written, but several have also got in touch to say that they quite like our work, which I'm not sure if that's good or not. We've also published a seam of privacy and surveillance stories. We were the first UK publication to cover the use of IMSI catchers in the country. These devices allow for the blocking of mobile phones and also the interception of data, and they're being used currently at some of Scotland's prisons. We also found out that Ofcom and mobile phone companies are working together to roll out the use of these devices around UK prisons. There may be kind of future implications. We also ran a story of other surveillance stories covering subjects from inappropriate and racist use of CCTV by council employees through to the use of the GCHQ-led Milk White surveillance programme in Scotland. These kind of stories have often been featured on technology news sites and also by organisations such as the Electronic Freedom Foundation. As you'll see from some of the pieces that I've shown, we're trying to work as much as possible with illustrators and graphics people to use original graphics, and we really want to increase our work with creatives, illustrators, musicians, video makers, even kind of virtual reality folk. We're trialling a new multimedia software, Clint, and we hope to push some boundaries in the future, as our capacity grows at least. Our geographical focus is definitely Scotland, because as a country there's a real interest in social justice and fairness. The scale of Scotland also makes our research quite manageable and the impact of stories greater, and the Scottish Parliament is also still relatively accessible. However, we do take an interest in UK-wide stories too. We recently published a piece on sexual assault by police in Northern Ireland. Other stories have included reports of Taliban death threats against Pakistani journalists and a powerful photo essay entitled Calais, Requiem for a Dream. This is by a talented photographer himself from a refugee background, looking at daily life in the camps of Calais. In fact, this photo essay won the Refugee Media Awards for online journalism from the Scottish Refugee Council. Diversity, despite our core group being predominantly bearded white men, is important to us, and we want this to be part of developing investigative journalism in Scotland, not just a tokenistic nod. So we plan to introduce bursaries for journalists from diverse or disadvantaged backgrounds. The fact that we pay fairly, I think, is very important as well to recruiting contributors that represent the society we live in and can tell stories from different perspectives. As a single parent juggling several jobs myself, I can't afford to do journalism for free, and I'm in a more privileged position than lots of other people. There's been lots of interest in the way we run the Ferret, and at the moment we're still really in the experimental stage where we try lots of things and see what works and what doesn't. However, we feel that so far we've been able to punch above our collective weight. In our first year, we were shortlisted for a British Journalism Award for digital innovation. We didn't win the category, but to be nominated at such an early stage in our existence was really encouraging. So that summarises a bit of the work that we do. We've already explored a huge range of topics and looking forward to exploring more, but the common theme is that we try to highlight injustices and be a force for the less powerful when much of the media serves the powerful. Of course, none of this would be possible without cold hard cash, so I'll pass you back to Peter to explain how we're funded.
So how do we survive? How do we fund the Ferret? How do we manage to create so much exclusive content, and yet, from where do we get our money? As every startup knows, a large part of doing anything like this is sweat equity. If if you listen to anyone in Silicon Valley. But the difference, I guess, with the cooperatives is there is actually no equity. So we are putting in the sweat, but we don't actually own the project, which is one of the reasons, I think, one of our huge selling points. But also, it means that it's even more important to create a sustainable model to go into the medium and the long term. And we are, as someone who's committed to funding journalism, we really feel that actually, and as we've grown, a mixed model of various types of income and ways of kind of getting, basically getting the money to fund journalism is the most effective way. Primarily, we are reliant on subscribers. And I think, as I said before, one of the advantages of subscribers is, as opposed to someone coming along and giving you a large amount of cash, subscribers are organically growing. They kind of have a tendency to kind of recur in our case, but also it's a platform that's very solid. These are people who have actually gone and paid money to subscribe to you, so they are very much people who are bought into the project. So and if you can continue to keep them in the project, you have a much better chance of actually long-term success. If you look at a lot of successful publications, they're doing really well across the world. Actually, still subscribers is a key thing, because you're talking about niche publications that you can appeal to certain people who want to read it, whether it's The Economist at a huge level or something like the Ferret at a much more local level. Our main avenue is, as I say, subscribers. We operate a porous paywall. So we allow people to see about 3 stories a month for free before the kind of paywall kicks in. As with lots of other similar sites, if you really wanted to get around the paywall, of course you can. But the reason why we have the paywall is both to let people see what we're doing, but also to help encourage them. Look, this does cost money. This does need your time. You know, because if everything is for free, it does make it a bit more difficult to make the case for why people should subscribe. And I think we feel like we don't have concrete data on it yet, but we're hoping to kind of build it into our model. But that is helping us to increase subscribers, where people hit the paywall once or twice and go, actually, I think I'll subscribe to this. In terms of actual subscribers and how many we have, at the moment, as of today, I think we've got about 350 paying subscribers who do everything from pay kind of £3 a month to £100 a year. We recently previously we had actually just 2 pay bands, £3 a month or £30 a year, and we added about a couple of months ago, we added this kind of gold Ferret where you can pay £100 a year if you want to support it more, and that's actually been really successful. Quite a few people have taken it on, so it's quite useful. Again, these are trial and error things you do when you're starting something like this, where you realise that some people actually want to give a little bit more, and it's good to give them the option to do that. It's still at very, very early days, so our subscribers are bringing in revenue of just over £12,000 a year. And obviously, as time goes on, this is building, and it's quite a nice little graph there. You can see it's quite a nice upward trajectory. So hopefully that will continue in that vein. And a kind of a pessimistic kind of analysis of our current growth suggests that income from subscribers will be over £16,000 by the end of this year. And it's worth emphasising that we do keep our overheads really, really low. I think we pay only about £150 a month on kind of non-journalism. We don't have an office. We have kind of quite minimal tech requirements and things like that. Obviously, as we get bigger, these are things that are probably likely to change, and they also do create sustainability issues as a small team who are giving a lot of time as volunteers. So, these are things that we will have to kind of address in the future. But in terms of being able to kind of funnel so much money into journalism, that's really, I think, helped, because the more people are seeing our stories, the more people subscribe. We've seen a very close correlation between the more content we produce and the more people subscribe, which isn't surprising, but also is actually quite refreshing and good to see. One thing that we've noticed as well is that a lot of our subscribers seem to be quite sticky. We don't get a huge amount of drop off. People do tend to stick around, which is again quite key. So we're kind of getting people who are kind of bought into the project and want to stay bought in. Recently, we had an away day, and we were talking about our kind of long-term strategy for kind of how we're going to kind of build in the coming years. We've decided to take a very conservative approach to thinking about our growth. I think, sometimes for new ventures, especially if you've had quite successful years, I think we feel we have, there can be a tendency to want to think that you can move much more quickly than you really can. So we've been trying to keep quite conservative estimates about our subscriber growth and also where we get money from other sources. And this is kind of just a rough estimate of where we think we might be in a couple of years. In an ideal world, I guess our growth would be faster than this, but we feel this is achievable and it bodes well for the future. So as we keep producing stories, we expect more and more people will come on. It's been interesting to see what our biggest stories by readership have been, actually. One which Rachel kind of mentioned briefly there, was one was the story on how government advisory said that fracking was no longer viable in Scotland. That was on the front page of the Times. That was very, very widely shared. We also mapped the Panama Papers addresses and invited readers to investigate them. That got a lot. Again, these aren't hugely difficult things to do from a tech point of view, but it's quite a good way of engaging readers. And I did a story about government grants and grim working conditions at Amazon's Scottish warehouses, which also got quite a lot of traffic and was mentioned in dispatches at Holyrood. What's interesting as well for us is that where the traffic to our site comes from, and it can come from different sources. So the two most popular stories on fracking and Panama Papers, that all came from Reddit. Most of the people are coming from Reddit Scotland in particular. And then the Amazon story, a lot of people came to us via Facebook. That was very heavily shared on Facebook. So we do use a range of social media platforms to push our stories. And it's also interesting to see that if you look at these are the average social shares between the Ferret, for a Ferret story, and the Herald is, well, it likes to say it's the oldest newspaper in the world, but that's always a movable feast, that one. But it's an established newspaper brand. So it's interesting to see that we're almost getting similar statistics as they are with their stories. These are people who've got a long social media presence as well. And despite our kind of paywall, we've had 250,000 page views in the last year, which is we're very happy with, I think, and that's been growing exponentially as we've gone on, as well as because we've got more content. And that's helping, it shows, I think, that we're kind of reaching our subscribers. We send story notifications every Sunday with kind of a mail out and MailChimp. And we're getting about 2/3 of our subscribers opening those. So again, these are very good response figures. I mean, people are engaging with the content that we're producing. Obviously, these are very humble beginnings, and sometimes you talk to, and I think other media organisations in a similar position have had this experience where people see your presence and think you must be much bigger than you are, especially in terms of turnover and revenue. And we are still, people do come to me and ask, "Can I get a job at the Ferret?" And I say, I hope you can someday, but that's not where we're at the moment. We don't even have the resources of a small local newspaper at the moment. So but what we do have, I think, is a distinct competitive advantage over a lot of other people, which both in terms of how we're run and also our perspective and what we're trying to do. And I think that allows us the opportunity to grow in a media environment where a lot of people are actually contracting and getting smaller. We're not committed to delivering rolling news. That's something we've never said we're going to do. We never expected to do. We feel like that's not where our value is. And what's been really interesting is if you kind of set that up from the start, people don't expect rolling news. People don't go onto the site every day expecting a new story. They're more likely to come to the site via third parties, and that's fine. But there's actually not the expectation is that the Ferret publishes something when it's worth publishing, and it means it's a good story and something that you should read, rather than something that's just reacting to things that have already happened. And the subscriptions aren't our only kind of means of funding. As you saw there, we have a crowdfunding. We've only ran one crowdfunding campaign so far, the initial one, because crowdfunding has advantages, but we also feel that subscribers is the most solid base, and crowdfunding is a useful way of bringing in extra revenue, especially to cover specific storage or specific things that we want to do. So we're going to run another campaign probably in the autumn, around a new theme. And again, I think one of the great advantages that we found with our crowdfunding campaign wasn't just actually getting money to do the story on fracking. It was building our brand recognition and people seeing who we are, and especially because we had quite a good, slick, well-made video. That kind of helped people feel like these people are actually kind of serious and they're engaged. So that's one of the reasons why we will do it again, but we're probably going to keep it to maybe one crowdfunding campaign a year rather than using it as a constant way to raise money. We also work in tandem with what's often pejoratively called the mainstream media. We sell a lot of our stories to particularly the newspapers in Scotland. What we do is we publish in conjunction. So we come to an arrangement where it's, the Ferret will get a billing in the first couple of paragraphs. We'll publish at the same time, and we'll publish all the documents online. And often we will get more hits than the story in the mainstream media because we have all the documents and people are coming to us to see, and we can do more than they can do. But what's quite good at this is basically brings in revenue as well. So we're able to do stories that we'd be doing anyway, but we're able to cover them in new ways by getting kind of the media to fund them. And so these payments, allow us to kind of save on our own costs and to produce more content. And also it helps to get our reach out there so people see who we are. If we have a front page story like we had in the Times, we've had in the National, we've had quite a few front pages, and they see, it's investigation with the Ferret. And what's also happening is traditional media outlets are coming to us and asking, can we work with them on stories? Can we bring stories ideas to them because it's becoming a little bit of a badge of honour to say that this story was done with the Ferret, which is it's really positive for us. We also have a tie-in with Firecrest Films, who are a successful independent film company based in Glasgow, who I used to work for actually. So I will kind of put my own kind of interest out there. But they make a lot of documentaries for Channel 4 Dispatches, for Panorama, and the deal we have is that, you know, if we have stories that will work for them, to work together on them to develop for television. So we think that's quite a useful way. Rather than creating our own bespoke production company, this is also another way for the Ferret to kind of reach out to new audiences. What we also do as well is we run training and conference events to skill up journalists in Scotland. We have, you know, there's issues around skills, and we feel that we're in a good position to kind of help address some of those gaps. So in April we held our first annual general meeting and our first conference. It was on in Strathclyde University. We had space for about 80 people, and we were pretty much sold out within a couple of weeks, so which was really, really exciting. We had a day-long event. It included a lot of presentations from people involved in the Panama Papers, from the OCCRP. We had a short film screening. We talked about freedom of information. We talked about filmmaking, investigative filmmaking. We did a debate about the media and social change, and then also a debate about press regulation. And it was great to see people really engaged at the conference, some of whom were from the journalistic community, but quite a lot of them were actually just citizens. And part of our role is actually building up citizen awareness, helping citizens to become journalists in a way as well, not in a citizen journalist way, but actually in a way that allows them proper access to information, teaches them public accountability. And one of the things that we did was we asked, these are a few shots from the conference, we asked participants to nominate and vote on stories that we should investigate with money that we made from the conference. So what we did was we gave people little post-it notes and stickers and let them kind of write down what they wanted to do and stick it on the door, and then they could use little kind of dots to say what they wanted to investigate. And it's a great way, it's just crowdfunding ideas, but crowdsourcing ideas, but it's a very successful way of getting ideas for stories, because often people will come with a specific thing that you might know that much about. So we're on the back of this. So what we did was the 3 most popular ideas we put onto the community forum and asked people to vote for. So, and on the back of that vote, we're now doing an investigation into lobbying in Scotland, which we're hoping to publish in the autumn. We're only getting some early results on. And the feedback from the conference was really excellent. And we're going to organise another one, a larger one next year, hopefully involving more practical training and hopefully involving some more work with people at the CIJ as well. What we also do is we also host quarterly meetups for Ferret members. So again, it's community building, because we don't have a physical space, trying to give people an opportunity to engage with what we're doing and engage with us, because to be open and open to the people who are supporting us. We've kind of, sometimes we just have drinks in a bar in Edinburgh or Glasgow so far. Ideally, we'd like to reach out beyond the central belt, but it can take a while to get up to Aberdeen, so hopefully we'll get there eventually. Last week we had a film screening in Edinburgh of Haystack, which is a film kind of documentary about the Investigatory Powers Bill. About 50 people attended that, and we had a discussion afterwards with people from the Open Rights Group and people from the audience, and it was quite a really good discussion on that. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to do to kind of make sure that we're kind of connecting with our readers and not just being a static online presence, but also having a real offline life as well. These kind of events, they don't bring in much money, it has to be said, and they do take a lot of energy. But what they really do, they can actually really have huge returns, though, when it comes to community building. And we found that when people attend these meetings, they're far more likely to become subscribers afterwards if they weren't beforehand, or to become more engaged with the project than they were beforehand. I guess we talked through now some of how we're funding and how we're hoping to go in the next in the coming years. I would like to hand you back to Rachel, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about how we're going to, what some of the challenges for us in the coming years are, and also kind of things we've learned from the project so far.
What have we learned over the past year that could be applicable beyond our own particular situation, and where do we go from here? How do we grow sustainably and move beyond a small core of volunteers to something that's larger and can last? First off, I think one of the most important things that we've learned is that even a small project like ours can have quite a big reach and quite a big impact. Indeed, such has been our reach in the past year that lots of people assume, as Peter mentioned, that we've got a large staff and we're well funded, which can make it harder to get subscribers. Measuring in the impact of your journalism is never particularly easy, but we have seen quite a number of our stories have an impact in the real world. We've been told privately that our focus on energy tycoon Algie Clough and his ambitions to press ahead with underseas coal gasification meant that the Scottish Government included undersea coal gasification in its moratorium, and then Clough subsequently withdrew his plans. Our cross-UK investigation into domestic violence against refugee women led to questions being raised in Parliament by a Glasgow MP, and I think meetings with the then Minister. Off the back of our story about a supposedly neutral consultant employed by the Scottish Government to look into fracking, the consultancy firm lost their contract. Our story about Scottish Government grants given to Amazon and poor working conditions at the firm's Scottish premises, called Fulfilment Centre, slightly sinisterly, was cited in debates at the Scottish Parliament. And some of our stories have led to incredible reader engagement. We asked our community to help us dig into the almost 5,000 UK addresses in the Panama Papers. A map we generated of all these addresses was shared hundreds, I think possibly even thousands, including other social media of times, and led to our readers getting involved in researching some of the names and addresses themselves. But success for the Ferret is not just in terms of policy change or reader engagement. We also arose out of a lack of investigative stories in the press, and part of our remit, as we see it, is to look at stories that are often neglected in the wider media, such as violence against women or mass surveillance. The question for us now is how to build our journalistic capacity sustainably into the future. We think we've learned not one but two key things. The first is that when you create a journalism cooperative, you automatically assume that the people who join will want to become intimately involved in the day-to-day running of the project. In the months before we launched, we even worried that we might lose control of the project. This has not happened. Indeed, it's been quite the opposite. When subscribers are happy, relatively, to give us money, they rarely actually want to become involved on a daily basis. We've instead had to actively look at how to bring subscribers into the fold through events and specific call-outs for support and skills. A recent call-out in this regard has been very successful, so we look to be expanding soon. Second, beware of overburdening founder members. As freelance journalists, we all have roles and jobs beyond the Ferret. We've all volunteered significant amounts of time and energy into the project, but it's crucial to realise that a small original team can only do so much, and to make allowances for this. With this in mind, we're actively growing our core team, bringing in new members onto the board and also encouraging new contributors. We're also looking to diversify our forms of funding. Currently, the bulk of our funding is from subscription. So when it comes to subs, again, as Peter mentioned, we've found that having a range of options works very well and people can give at the level that works for them. We would like to be able to grow to a position where we're publishing a new original story every day by 2017. But this is going to require more resources for staff, for the investigations themselves, but also editorial. So we've got no paid staff at the moment. Likely to continue the way that we want to, we are going to have to take on editorial staff. So with this in mind, we have to get the money to do it, and we're looking to build our subscriber base and increase our income from events, from collaborative work, mainstream media work, and also from grants. As important as cash is skills. So we are journalists, not fundraisers. So we've been actively looking for support from those who've got experience of grant writing. We've also been looking for people who've got experience running events, as well as marketing experts who can help us work on our subscriber base. Also coders to help us develop ever more exciting content for our readers. Similarly, we're not media lawyers. We have been receiving pro bono advice from one of Scotland's biggest media law firms, but we're also trying to build legal capacity in-house. It goes without saying that for a small investigative outfit like us, solid legal advice is absolutely essential. In the meantime, we do pay for legal advice on a case-by-case basis, because obviously we don't want to risk jeopardising our future. One of the most rewarding aspects of the Ferret has definitely been discovering that there is a market for targeted quality journalism. Responses to our stories on social media are often very positive and encouraging, and we also have several regular trolls now, which is surely a sign of success. It's also a lot of fun for a group of freelancers who are often used to working solo to come together in a team. It's sociable, it's enjoyable, and as a project we're also definitely more than the sum of our parts. We can do things together as a team we just can't do alone. We're finding now that tip-offs come with increasing regularity, and many established media outlets have been praising us for our work and sometimes even stealing our stories. As we do receive more leads from the public, we've been giving increasing thought to security and how we look after those giving us information. As with most news organisations, this is of course a work in progress, but it's important to us. We're also currently working on an interesting whistleblowing project, so watch this space. So what is the takeaway from our talk today? Obviously this is up to you, but I'd suggest firstly that there is a clear public appetite for investigative journalism, certainly in Scotland, and this is hugely heartening. When we launched, we did not anticipate the strength of the welcome that we would get. The second point that you could take away is that nobody else has all the right answers. All these kinds of young projects are trial and error. I was at the CIJ summer school 2 years ago when the Ferret had barely been conceived. I went along to a session like this and was advised very kindly that paywalls would never work for investigative journalism, and that the best chances for a project like this surviving were to go with the most populist subjects. Thus far, our experiments with the paywall have been successful, and while we do public votes on popular themes to explore, we also feature stories on topics like domestic violence, which are not particularly commercial, but are definitely the right thing to do. If you write or record stories that you care about, find others with the same enthusiasm and drive. Do some research about business models, but also follow your instincts and be willing to learn from mistakes. You never know how things will unfold. There can never be too much good investigative journalism, and there will definitely never stop being a need for it.
Private Eye is a separate organisation. It's very, very, again, and it's interesting to see what Private Eye has done in terms of paywalls and subscribers. You know, so it's not a dissimilar model, but obviously it's at a much bigger scale. So I don't think we're necessarily conflicting that much. And you know, we have, I guess, one of the reasons Scotland is our locus is because it's basically where we all live. It's where our basis is, but also, you know, I worked in making documentary films in the not too distant past, and if you're making UK-wide documentary television, it's very hard to include Scotland because the legislative context and the political context in Scotland are now so radically different to England and Wales that if you're talking about issues that are legislatively based, it's just apples and oranges. So there is a need for a bespoke approach that allows, that's where people are actually connected with the different legal framework, but also different legislative context that now exists north of the border. So I think that's one. We're not adverse to doing UK-wide stories, but also from a membership point of view and a subscriber point of view, we have found that stories that are Scotland based do better for us, to be honest, pure and simple. Do you want to talk about humour?
The microsite that Peter referred to, which is called Droppings, is probably where we do park some of our slightly more satirical stuff, possibly kind of media industry gossip, a few bits and pieces like that. And we have also been in discussions about whether we can have any regular features that are slightly more humorous, just as you say, to kind of leaven what can be quite heavy otherwise. So that's kind of a work in progress. It's definitely worth watching out. We also, in our social media presence, try and lighten things up a bit, so hence lots of Ferret GIFs, that kind of thing.
The name itself as well,
the
really.
Ferret, yeah, I mean, that was very much unanimous decision to go with that name in the end, and again, it was, you know, using humour a bit and something quirky to pull people into what can actually be quite serious.
And in terms, I guess, of, you know, in terms of lobbying and stuff, I think we're freedom of information advocates and transparency advocates, and that's part of what we do. And that, I think, bleeds in actually to the second question about engagement, because it's partly about engaging citizens and trying to say, these are your rights, these are how you do things. What we'd love to do is have a very clear page on the site, eventually in a video of how you send an FOI request, because some people do find it quite a daunting thing to do before they've done it. But what we're really trying to do, I think, in the future, the first year has in some ways been about consolidating and building, but what we really do want to engage with readers beyond just stories and beyond just photoing. It's something we'd really like to do. In some ways, that's one of the harder points of not having a physical space where people can come and interact with you in that kind of way. But you know, we're looking to do more training that would involve just people who are citizen journalists, people who are researchers, people who want to get more involved, people who are just any members of the public. You know, we're hoping to do some more training later this year that will be around some of these issues and that will allow people an opportunity, and also people from diverse backgrounds, not necessarily with an experience in journalism at all. And I think that's really important for us as we build, because lots of people, these things can be quite daunting for people. These words can be quite daunting, and it's about saying, no, you know, even from, you know, I spent all of yesterday learning how to use Excel because I just can't bloody use the thing. And it's, you know, it's really good for someone to sit down to start and talk to you from the very beginning, and in a jargon-free way. So I think that's something we're really keen to do.
And non-patronising as well. Yeah, definitely. I mean, Scotland's small enough as well that it's quite easy to hook these things up. So, I mean, CIJ is going to hopefully come up with us later in the year and help us out with some community training, and we can access the organisations that are working with people at a grassroots level who can then come along and use those opportunities. So I think Scotland's small enough that we can make that kind of stuff happen.
At the moment, we don't have a huge amount of multimedia content due to cost. I'd like, you know,
due to expertise, to be honest. We're all pretty much kind of print journalists, kind of print/online, but none of us are highly experienced multimedia journalists.
And I think that's what we'd like to do.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important. I think that if I was a young journalist, that's the kind of skills that people want to be coming out with.
Definitely. Sorry, we forgot to take your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you'd considered any other ways of generating revenue apart from subscription and what they were.
So yeah, crowdfunding obviously has been a biggie for us and will continue to be an annual source of income every year. grants, as we mentioned, we're looking at. I know the Bristol Cable obviously got quite a substantial grant from one particular organisation, so we're looking at all those kinds of options. We've had a grant in the last year that we will hopefully be able to get again next year that was non-specific, so it could be used for core costs, which is extremely useful. Other sources of revenue, I suppose events, but they're always going to be pennies, really, rather than huge amounts.
I think part of it as well is, trying to have the conversation with funders like Carnegie, who's a big funder in Scotland, or even the lottery, to change the perception about funding journalism.
Yeah.
There is a kind of thing where you don't fund journalism, like Creative Scotland doesn't really fund journalism, but there's a few, because they don't see it. What I'd like, if we got bigger and we had more of a video aspect, then there's probably opportunities for, for what was Old Scottish Screen to bring that kind of stuff in. But at the moment, we're kind of, and we don't. This other thing is capacity building as well. Grants writing isn't our core skill, so we are actively looking for people to come in who've got that kind of skill to be able to help us to do that kind of work as well.
I think going into specific sectors as well, like looking at food, for example, as a subject, there's areas that you go into where there are specific grants that you can source.
You get subscribers to vote on topics and so on. Do you use the data that you get from looking at how people visit the site does that tally with what people vote on? And also, do you use the data that you get from people visiting the site to look at to inform your other editorial decisions, like that story didn't work very well, or does that kind of come into your thinking? I'm just interested to know how you use those sort of numbers.
In what we're doing, we are also cognizant that some of the stories we do are stories that are not massive. They're not the kind of stories that people always want to read, but we think they're important, like domestic violence. But we do look at what people are reading and what they're not reading, and we do. That's one of the reasons I said we do a lot more Scotland stories, because it is the stories that our readers read more because of who we are and our knowledge. That's just the kind of stuff. So we're looking to delve into that data more and more, and to try and see what we've been doing in terms of actually. In terms of trying to raise more income, we have been doing little bits of marketing using social media, using things like Twitter and Facebook with small sums of money, which has actually been reasonably successful so far. But that's also quite a good test case to see what stories people are reacting to. So yeah, we are kind of quite cognizant of it, and we're trying to look at new ways, because it's interesting to get this stage, because we can see where people are coming from, and you can see how different stories play differently in different places. So it's something we are looking to try and use more to kind of utilise.
I'd say there definitely is a connection between what people vote for in the votes for themes and what people end up looking at. But there's been the odd international story as well that's just gone really, really big, like the Sri Lankan police story, because it got lots of pickup over there. There was a story that I did on Facebook censorship against Kurdish activists that also got massive pickup because it got shared amongst that community.
You mentioned the emphasis that you put on factual journalism, and that's the nature of investigative journalism. But I was wondering, editorially as a team, do you feel like you sometimes have to come out a bit more politicized, a bit more editorialized, in terms of the kind of impact that you want to give to the stories that you have, or do you literally sort of let your stories speak for themselves and affect change in the way that they do? And I wonder whether your readers kind of would like to see you push more towards making the recommendations as to what you would like to see change from the stories that you cover.
Okay, so yeah, I mean we do tend to very, very much want to stay away from any editorializing kind of comment, anything like that. Obviously, journalism is to some degree subjective, and how we frame a story kind of affects the interpretation. We're very much conscious of that. I mean, if you look at the Ferret, you can't help but notice, we're broadly speaking left of centre. We've got some people who follow and support us who've maybe got more of a libertarian slant. So, that slant is there and we can't deny it, but we do try and very much stay out of specific political debates, stay out of party politics. And yeah, probably the only reason that we really would go there is when it's about access to information, access to knowledge, that kind of subject.
I guess we have actively fed stuff we've done into politics. So the Amazon story, when there's discussion about giving Scottish government grants to companies that don't pay the living wage, was an issue. We pushed that story. We gave it to Willie Rennie, the leader of the Scottish Liberal Democrats. It was mentioned in Hollywood. Similarly with the domestic violence, that led to a question by Anne McLaughlin, who's an SNP MP in Glasgow North, about that. So if we've done research in an area, you've got a story that speaks to something that's going on, I think it's important that the story gets out and gets aired.
That it has political impact for sure, but yeah, I mean, I think.
But rather than editorialising too much in the print, we are quite keen to, to help with that.
Because I think that leaves the content with extra value. In fact, the fact that we don't do that means that people see it as more credible and more authoritative, which is actually fundamentally probably more helpful at the end of the day.
If you'd had conversations about ever bringing out anything in print as a way of reaching or drawing in new readers, it was interesting hearing about cable doing that.
I think that the reason why we've never done anything in print is just simply our geographical focus is I think too large. We don't have a static base, and we don't have a place. The cost implications are part of it too. I don't think we've ever felt that print would add something of value beyond what we already have. If we had more funds, it'd be something. I'm still a big believer in print, and it can have a really useful impact in terms of people who see who don't otherwise see it. But I don't think we have. It's the allocation of reasonably meagre resources. So I don't think we felt so far that it would have value. Maybe in a conference in the future we might look to do something in tandem with a conference, a small run print or something like that. That's different. But in terms of an actual something that would get kind of distributed widely across the country, I don't think we literally it's partly to do with, I'm not sure how much value it would add, but also to just financials. I would love us down the line to be doing more film production, because there's more, there's still budgets in film in a way that there isn't in print.